district council committees. This channel has been set up to make sure that anyone can observe our democratic meetings. Please therefore remember that this meeting could be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with access to the internet. There are subtitles available via the YouTube broadcast. These are generated by YouTube. The council is not responsible for these subtitles or their accuracy. There is a delay between the meeting and the YouTube broadcast of about 30 seconds. Webcast officer, please can you commence the broadcast and confirm?
Yes, I can confirm it has started.
Thank you very much. Okay. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee on Tuesday, 22nd of September 2020. Before we commence with the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. These are: only speak when the Chairman asks you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know when you want to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order, which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you're in the meeting. Members are asked to mute their microphones when not speaking and consider turning their videos off too to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind that there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you, so please bear this in mind. Presentations and images will be visible on the screen. Please indicate via the chat function if there is a problem. When referring to a report, please quote the page and paragraph number. There is no private business for tonight's meeting. However, please can I remind members that when dealing with private session business, it is your responsibility to make sure that your venue and connection is private. If you lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the access to information regimes, FOI, EIR, and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation, and the Council's Code of Conduct. To assist with managing the chat function for this meeting, the agenda item will be included to act as markers. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate of the required members in attendance. The Planning Committee consists of the following members: the Chairman, Councillor Mrs. Wendy Scattergood, the Vice Chairman, Councillor Mrs. Iona Parker, Councillor James Abbott, Councillor Kevin Bowers, Councillor Tom Cunningham, Councillor Patrick Horner, Councillor Hilton Johnson, Councillor David Mann, Councillor Andy Mundy, Councillor Frankie Ritchie, Councillor Mrs. Gabrielle Spray, Councillor Nick Unsworth, Councillor Justin Wrench. Apologies for this meeting there have been no apologies for this meeting, I beg your pardon, no apologies received. The officers for the meeting are Chris Padgey, Planning Development Manager, Tim Havers, Principal Planner, Martin Mason, Strategic Development Engineer at Essex County Council, Alison Webb is clerking the meeting, and Jessica Mann, myself and Emma Wisby are the meeting facilitators. To help distinguish councillors and officers on the broadcast, councillors have the prefix of councillor and officers have a prefix of officers. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Mrs. Wendy Scattergood. Thank you.
Chairman, before we start this meeting, Councillor Kevin Bowers joined the meeting whilst we were admitting. So, Councillor Bowers, could you please test your microphone for me, please?
Hi, Emma. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Chairman, are you able to proceed the meeting?
I am now. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Emma. Good evening, members, and good evening to everyone watching on the YouTube. I am Councillor Wendy Scattergood. I'm the Chairman of the Planning Committee, and obviously will be chairing this meeting this evening. You have been reminded, members, that if you wish to speak, please notify me on the chat line. I do have one member who might have a slight problem, so if you don't see their name on the chat line yourselves and I call that member, please do not criticise me. I know what I am doing for once in my life. So I'll now commence the meeting. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have no apologies. Everyone is present. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. CPRE have made a representation. I'm an ordinary member of CPRE, so an MPI interest.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Anyone else? No, there's no one else wishes to declare an interest.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I'm just trying to catch up. I'm also a member, an ordinary member of the CPRE.
Thank you, Councillor Unsworth. Thank you. Right, no one else. I'll move on to item 3, the minutes of the previous meetings. Members, I am sorry, but we still do not have the minutes of the 18th of August, 1st of September, or the 15th of September. They are not quite ready, and they will be deferred till next meeting, which is obviously next week. Thank you. Item 4, public question time. We have no general planning questions under item 4. We go straight to item 5. Obviously, this is a one item evening, so we have nothing under part B. So we have no statements to be read on this application either. So we're now going to consider application 19-00786 out, Towerlands, Panfield Road, Braintree. This members can be found on pages 5 to 84, and the presentation will be made by Tim Havers. And as we have no statements, I'll go straight to the presentation. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. Okay, I'm just going to start by sharing my screen with you. Okay, so you should now be seeing the presentation in full screen mode. This is obviously quite a large application, so I will keep my presentation as concise as I can, but it obviously needs to cover certain points, so if you could just bear with me in terms of the length of it. So this is an outline planning application for up to 575 dwellings. It includes on-site provision for early years and childcare nursery, on-site provision for retail and community facilities, green infrastructure, including formal, informal open space and amenity space, an ecology mitigation area, landscaping, 2 vehicle access points, closure of existing accesses, footway and cycleway network, and then supporting infrastructure such as gas, water, telecommunications. It also requires the diversion, or slight diversion of existing public right-of-way, sustainable drainage systems, and necessary demolition and ground remodelling. So it's an outline application with all matters reserved except access, and the site is the Towerlands site at Panfield Road, Braintree. So I'm just waiting for my presentation to catch up. Could I just check with Emma Wisby, are you seeing a blank page or are you seeing a second page of presentation?
We are seeing just a blank page at the moment, Tim. Would you like to unshare your screen and start again?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Members, thank you for bearing with us while we just sort this little technical issue out. I can now see the site location plan, wider context plan. Is that the screen you wish to proceed with?
That is correct. Thank you, Emma. Okay, I'm just going to keep it on small screen until I've established that there isn't some sort of technical glitch. So this is the site location plan. This is a very zoomed out version, obviously, just to show the wider context. So application site is up here, outlined in red, and we're on the northwestern side of Braintree. Braintree development boundary runs adjacent to the site here. Then to the north, we have Bocking. To the west, the village of Panfield. And to the south is the site which has the planning consent for the Panfield Lane development. And then beyond that is the Springfield Industrial Estate. Okay. Emma, I think we have got a slight technical issue here because it's going back to a blank page again. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Apologies, members, as we do have time to time have problems with presentations. If you don't mind bearing with the officer while we just sort this issue out. I thank you for your patience while we just resolve this. So if you can just take your time with us, we'll be grateful. Members, officers are just seeing if they can present the PowerPoint presentation in a slightly different format. Thank you for bearing with us. Hopefully we can resolve this shortly. I do apologise for any inconvenience you're being put to. This is still being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. We're not adjourning the meeting as of yet, but if there's something that we can't resolve in the next few moments, we will look to adjourn the meeting so we can resolve this. But hopefully we've got a solution shortly. So please bear with us. Thank you. Okay, officers are indicating that we're just going to try a PowerPoint presentation. They'll take a few seconds to load that and just to test that. So thank you, members, for bearing with us. Members, as you can see, we've got officers just testing the PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully this will be the solution to our issue this evening, and I'm sure that Tim will take you right back to the beginning of the presentation when he's able to do so. So thank you for bearing with us. Thank you, members, for bearing with us. Hopefully Tim has a solution for us this evening. So I will now hand back over to Tim and he will recommence his presentation on this planning application 19007860UT, Towerlands, Panfield Lane, Braintree. Tim, are you happy to proceed?
Yes, as long as this works. Let me just test to the next slide. Apologies for this, members. This was tested earlier, but for some reason the PDF format's coming off as blank slides now. Okay, could I just check, Emma, are you now seeing site location plan?
We are, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Emma. So if I carry on where I was then, so this is, as I said, a wider context, and I was just describing how this sits to the northwest of Braintree, with Panfield Village to the west, Braintree here, and then Bocking over here. And I was just mentioning that the Panfield Lane site with its existing planning permission sits here, and then Springwood Drive further down here. So before I go into various site photographs and site plans, I just wanted to start by just reminding everyone really that this is not a speculative scheme as such. This does have a draft allocation in our emerging local plan. So it's a draft policy, but it's policy LPP 20, which looks to allocate the site in the new local plan for residential development. The draft policy states 600 dwellings with affordable housing, either a primary school on the site or a contribution towards one off-site, early years and childcare nursery on site, community facilities and retail facilities on site, and then public open space. So site location plan in terms of the more normal site location plan. So again, you can see that we have Panfield Lane to the east here. To the north, we have Deanery Hill. In terms of the existing sites, I'm actually going to switch just to an aerial photo to show what's currently on site. So it's really a site of almost two halves. We have an old golf course here. It's not currently in use. I believe it stopped being used in around 2012. But you can still see the remains of the fairways and various bunkers you'll see in the site photos. And then the north is or was an equestrian facility. So there are some paddock areas of paddocks up here. Then we have a menage here, what was a menage. And then at various buildings, there was also it was an equestrian centre and a sort of commercial centre as well. So a variety of uses and slightly different two halves to the site. The main access to the site at the moment is approximately here. So some site photographs just to take you around the site really. I'll start with the two access points. The two access points proposed to the site. So we have one here on Panfield Lane. The access would come through approximately here. And then the other main access point which is proposed would be on Deanery Hill. So this makes use of an existing access point, which would be here. It would be a bit wider than this. And then just looking back from inside the site, so that's that same access point onto Deanery Hill, the existing access, and that would be widened out this way. So coming back to the site frontage again, this is the junction between Panfield Lane and Deanery Hill. The application site frontage is here, and you can just see those existing buildings on the site there. Just turning slightly to the left, I'm standing in roughly the same place for this photo. So now looking down Panfield Lane, the application site's on the right behind this fence line here. And then moving on to the application site, what I've done really is take a series of photos to sort of walk around the application site almost. So we're still down at the bottom end of the site. On the right of the photo is Panfield Lane. And this is actually the top end of the golf course. So the golf course stretches away this way, and the equestrian area is up here and stretches away behind the building that you can see there. So there are, as I mentioned, quite a few existing buildings on the site, relatively centrally placed, although they are down towards the Braintree end of the site. But you can see them here, and this was actually a car park area for the equestrian and conference centre. Some of these buildings are in quite a poor state of repair, as you can see from this photograph. And then others are a bit better state of repair here. And then probably, I think this is probably the best building here. So moving on to the golf course area. As I said, there are the remains of the fairways, and sometimes you can see the remains of the bunkers. And then again, another photo of the disused golf course area. Other points just to note, on that side of the site, there's an existing stream that runs through the site there. And that flows into this pond here. So southern boundary, we're still on the golf course side of the site, and this is just taken looking towards the adjacent Panfield Lane development site, which at the moment is obviously agricultural land. And then what I've done here, I've actually stepped over the site boundary, walked outside, almost towards Panfield Village, really in that direction, turned around only 100 metres or so, just to look back. So what we're looking at here is the outer, or part of the outer western boundary of the site, which is formed by where these tall trees are here. That's the site boundary, and we're looking back towards Braintree. And then another photo of that same boundary just further up. So again, looking back towards the site, and the application site sits behind this hedge or tree line here. So I then moved to the top of the site, the closest area to Panfield Village, furthest from Braintree. There is a dedicated ecology area, which I'm sure members will have seen on the plans, but just to give you an indication of what this is currently like, it's currently a paddock, grass paddocked area. This is part of it, and another view there. So a big chunk of this, roughly speaking, coming down on this side and then at a right angle out across here would become a dedicated ecology area, which I'll come into more detail on in a moment. So now just starting to turn and move back towards Braintree from the top end of the site, we're now looking at the other side of those buildings. And this is the equestrian half of the site. You can just see there sort of post and rail fences and what used to be paddocks. Then moving out onto Deanery Hill. So this is just the Deanery Hill boundary. So the application site is on the left here. And this was just to give an idea really of the interface between the site and Deanery Hill itself. And then moving still back down towards the Braintree, the bottom end of the site. What I wanted to do here was just identify the neighbouring properties. So slightly unusual in a way for a site of this size. We only have 3 existing neighbouring properties, so I can identify all of them individually. First one here is Oak Cottage, which shares a boundary along here with the application site. Now the second one is much further down into the site. It sits adjacent to the existing buildings. And this is Towerlands Cottages here. And the third one's on the other side of the site. It's known as the Coach House. It sits adjacent to what was the golf course area. And this hedge line here is a public footpath that runs in between the application site and the Coach House. So they are the 3 existing neighbours, closest neighbours to the application site. So that was site photos. This plan's quite helpful in a way, so we kind of moved around in this direction, clockwise direction, and then finished up with the 3 neighbouring properties. The first one was Oak Cottage, which was there. The second one was Towerlands Cottage, which was there. And the third one was the Coach House, which was there. So what I now want to do is just take you through a series of the drawings and some extracts from the design code which accompanies this application, and just explain really the process that we've gone through with the applicant. So I'll start with the Illustrative Masterplan. It probably makes the most sense to start there. So the key points then, we've got the 2 spine roads, 2-part spine road that runs through the centre of the site, and the proposed access points here. So you've got one access point here onto Deanery Hill, the second access point here onto Panfield Lane, and then there's provision for the third access, which would be the link through to the Panfield Lane site here. So in addition to these, we've then got the dedicated ecology area that I was talking about at the top end of the site here. There is then a large wildflower meadow area here. And then in the central part of the site, you've got the development parcels. And then there's an additional parcel down here. And then this yellow dotted area is a community growing area. A couple of other points just to note. 2 children's play areas, one here, which I think is a neighbourhood area of play, so slightly larger, and then a smaller local area of play here. And then along the bottom with the principal area, it's a sort of linear park really, but it includes SUDS features as well. So it's an outline application. There is a design code, which I'll go through in a moment, but whereas the previous master plan was illustrative, these plans would be for formal approval. So we've followed a similar process really to we did with the straight submittal application. We've tried to take that process and refine it and take everything we learned from the straight submittal application and try to improve on it again with this application. So we've got a series of parameter plans that would be for formal approval, and they would tie down at this stage quite a high level of detail. So the first one is the land use and access plan. Essentially what this fixes is the access points, the position of the spine roads, the development parcels, the village green area in the centre, the early years childcare and nursery site, the mixed use retail and community site, and the ecology area, and then the green buffer areas that are not for development. Following on from that, we have the density plan. I'm just going to flick through my hard copies at the same time. So this shows the density plan. So overall, it's not a particularly dense site. It's obviously edge of settlement. So the net density for the developable area is 32 dwellings a hectare, which is about officer-wise what we would expect and would consider to be appropriate. We wouldn't really want to go higher than that for net density. But within that, there are different density bands. So the lowest densities are as low as the bottom end of it is 25 dwellings a hectare, should be along this frontage. And then we will come up to, so that's 25 to 30 on the outer edge, 27 to 32 around here, and then 32 to 37 around here. So we're trying to differentiate the character as we move in from the edge of the development through to the heart of the development, and also the parts of the site that are, I suppose, better shielded really and more appropriate for higher density. We have a green infrastructure parameter plan. That really just adds a little bit of detail to the other parameter plans. Again, it's things like green areas where you can't build, obviously, development parcels where you can, stars indicating SUDS areas. It doesn't add a huge amount of detail, but I think it's worth having just to add that extra layer of protection really in terms of certainty moving forward. Now this plan isn't for formal approval because it doesn't need to be. There are other plans that cover this, but I just picked this out because I think it's quite useful. It's the only plan I've got that actually shows the ecology area and only focuses on that. So I just wanted to explain what we've got here. We've got on this section here, this is an area that wouldn't be publicly accessible. It would be accessible for management purposes, but not to the general public. There are 8 ponds here. That would be 8 new ponds. So they would be specifically designed and dug to accommodate great crested newts in particular. And they would be part of this designated habitat area. Then there's an existing tree belt here. And then the other side of it is wildflower meadow area that I mentioned earlier. So this is the connection or link between these two areas, and this would be publicly accessible, but in a relatively limited sense, insofar as it's a wildflower meadow and it would have pathways mown through it, and it would be managed under an ecology management plan and managed by a management company. So it would be publicly accessible, but in a carefully planned manner. And then the other thing that's important on this plan is you can see how this green area then links around the boundary of the site to these other green areas and out into the adjacent countryside here, across, down, there's a link to this. This is a TPI woodland area outside the site here, and then across down here. So in terms of building heights, again, we've got a parameter plan that would fix building heights, so there wouldn't be uncertainty around that. So the way this would work, the outer edge would be 2 to 2.5 story. So that's this band here, but limited to 9.5 meters. So that's not a particularly tall 2.5 story building. The next category is the darker purple area here. And that would be 2 to 2.5 with some 3 story, maximum height of 11 meters, which is obviously to accommodate the 3 story. But there is quite a strong caveat that only 75% of it would be 2 story. So the bulk of this is still 2 story. And then we've got the bits here in the heart of the development, which, as I mentioned previously, the shielded areas, and they would be taller again. So there you've got a mix of 2, 2.5 and 3 story, and you've got a maximum height of 12.5 meters. So this all links back to the design code and the design strategy for the site, and making sure that we would have different character areas and that you would sense the change in character of the development as you move through it from the countryside and the ecology areas, the wildflower meadows, and then through into the heart of the site. Phasing plan. This is illustrative, so this is not for approval, but I think it's worth showing. It could change, and I'm sure members have noticed that there's a standard phasing condition that we would recommend. But in broad terms at the moment, what would be proposed, these two would be the first phases. Phase 1 here, 1A and 1B, then moving across to here, phase 2, and then phase 3 would be this outer edge. Okay, so the 2 detailed site access points, we've got the one at Panfield Lane, which is here. And then there's the second one at Deanery Hill, which is here. Just wanted to come back to the first one. Something here which officer-wise we think is critical for this site, and that is the cycle link here. So where this link comes in and joins Panfield Lane, there will be a pedestrian and cycle crossing, and that would link into this which is a dedicated cycleway, one of several which form a big loop, and I'll come to that again in a moment, around the site. But essentially, if you wanted to cycle around the site and then cycle into town, you would come down here, across your crossing, onto this, which is the new proposed cycle link, down here, across here, and then linking to Churchill Avenue, and then through and down into town. This link's really important. One of the things that we've sort of been focused on as officers is the current lack of cycle provision in this area. And of course, with the Panfield Lane development adjacent to this, you would then also have an excellent link through that way and through to the Springwood Industrial Estate. But the important thing is this consent needs to stand on its own 2 feet. So that's why having this link this way is critical. So the design code, we've not just got a set of parameter plans, we've got a very detailed design code that inform those parameter plans. And those parameter plans were almost secondary in a way to this design code. So the code is a detailed document in the region of 80, 90 pages, several parts to it. What I've done is just pick out some important parts that I wanted to run through with you. Obviously, you don't want to go through the whole document, but you've got an introductory part, you've got landscaping strategy, and then you've got streetscape strategy. It's quite a simple format document. I think the aim really is to make it quick and easy for everybody to follow. So when developers pick this document up, they would know exactly what they were expected to adhere to. And I would emphasize that is adhere to. This isn't something that would be up for negotiation. All that work's been done already. This is a document that developers would be adhering to. But equally for officers, for members of the public, anyone else that wanted to look at this is a document that should read easily and be easily understandable without too much jargon, etc. So the design code is built around 2 things really. One is the street hierarchy for the site, and the other one is the character areas. So in terms of character areas, the applicants team have identified a series of areas. You've got the parkland edge, which is these 2 character areas here. Got the avenue down the middle, got the lanes right in the centre of the site, and the barns, which is the rural edge here. So if I just start by showing some of the illustrative sketches in the design code, and you might recall from the Straits Mill site we had similar. So this part of the code is illustrative, and there could be many ways in which the site is built out, but I think it's always helpful to have this kind of imagery in the site. So we're actually looking here at the western side of the site, and we're looking at that parcel that was slightly on its own just past the community growing area here. So the adjacent Panfield Lane site is just on this side here. So you can see this illustrates quite well. You can see we're looking at the bottom end of the wildflower meadow, the cycleway which runs along the frontage of that wildflower meadow area. And you can see this is one of the cycle routes that comes through here. And there's another one here, and these cycleways loop around the whole site. This is just a continuation of that really. So if you were cycling, you'd continue along here. And another point I just wanted to mention on that was something that officers feel quite strongly about is the segregation of cyclist and vehicle traffic. So there are 2 schools of thoughts on this. I think some people prefer to keep the 2 together. But I think at BDC, we feel quite strongly that segregation is much better, particularly on a site like this. So if you want to cycle, if you're a highly experienced road cyclist covering a huge distance, then yes, you might want to cycle on the road, and you can do. But if you're not and you're out just for a leisure cycle, you're taking your children out, then you've got the ability here to have a really nice cycle without going on and sharing the road with cars, buses, etc. So this has been specially designed to allow that and to get you all over the site without needing to go on the road. So we had the character areas, and then we have the street hierarchies. So there are 4 categories: the primary streets, secondary streets, tertiary streets, and the private drives. I think the street hierarchies are just as important as the character areas, because they are the building blocks, or the almost linear building blocks, and then the character areas sit around those. So a massive amount of thought's gone into these and into having that established hierarchy. And there's a lot of detail that sits behind each of these categories. So what I've done is just pick one. I just picked the primary street category, and I'm just going to show you the level of detail that sits behind that. So you have an introductory section here, And then you have, firstly, essentially a plan that identifies where the primary streets are. So at a glance, everyone can see what we're talking about. And then you have a detailed table, and the table has a strong, sort of lengthy set of criteria really that you must adhere to when you're designing your reserve matters parcel. So it could be that one developer bought this site, or it could be that 3 or 4 did, but they would all be adhering to this table. So you would get that continuity across the site. It wouldn't look like 3 developers had just shoved random developments together. They'd all be adhering to these common standards. And then it goes beyond that even. It has cross sections showing the level of detail. So this again is still the primary street, but you can see here it's got the carriageway width. It tells you it's got to be 6.7 meters. It tells you that you must have a 3 meter verge on each side of that. You can't skimp on that on either side, it has to be both sides. And then you've got on one side, you've got your 2 meter footway, and on the other side, you've got your 3.5 meter shared footway and cycleway. So that's where I was talking about the segregation. And then you've got your frontage, and you've got 3 meter frontage. So you've got quite a big setback, even between the edge of the cycleway or footway and the houses. And then in terms of your total width between the road, you can see this is a big, wide, formal street, which would have regular and rhythmic tree planting along it. So it's going to create a really formal avenue that would be clearly the top of the hierarchy in terms of the streets. So then we come back to the character areas, which are the other building blocks for the site. So again, I just wanted to show the level of detail that sits behind these. We had that original map that showed them. So I picked the Barnes rural edge just to go through. So again, you have an introductory page in the design code. And even things like the imagery, they're not random images. They're images that have been picked and screened by officers, in particular our urban design officer or urban design consultant, to make sure that things that we're showing aren't inappropriate. That was something that we thought about. If it would be easy for a developer to come back and point to a picture and say, well, you've got this in your approved design code, so I think I should be able to build like this. In this case, the imagery here is imagery that's of a decent quality throughout. So you have your initial page. Then you move to materials. So bearing in mind we're at an outline application stage, we've pinned down here materials. You've got a palette of materials, and it describes them as well. So again, we would know what we're getting. The level of uncertainty here is dramatically reduced. And some of these materials, we did try and push the envelope a bit here. We've got the classic sort of timber boarding, for example, bearing in mind this is the Barnes rural edge, but we've also got things like cedar shingles, for example. So we're trying to push here for the highest quality that we could get. Then you come on to this again, still on the Barnes rural edge. So this is still a level of detail that's shown, more photos, but we've also got 3D imagery here showing the kind of things that could be created. Just to put this in context, you'd be standing where these people are on the edge of the wildflower meadow. That's the cycleway that runs down the edge of it. And you'd be looking into the outer edge. And what the applicant's team did here was design a series of almost courtyard type areas. And the idea was to have filtered views into the development, but not to have a harsh, abrupt edge from the wildflower meadow. So they're trying to draw in some of the openness and some of the greenery into these areas. And then it goes further again. It has a plan view, and it has a series of bullet points, just basic design principles that developers would have to adhere to if they decided to develop this particular parcel. And you can see the extent. You've got 16 or 17 separate bullet points there, which have been scrutinised by officers. And then I think this is the final section. Again, it's still on the Barnes rural edge, more 3D imagery, but here we're dealing with different matters. So it's talking specifically about parking, how that would be dealt with, and then the public realm and the ecology area or ecology impact. So there's a huge amount of detail. And what we're really trying to do is keep it simple and easy to follow, but make sure that we had a high degree of certainty and a very high degree of quality. So separate aspect of the design code is landscaping and the planting palette. I've picked this page of the code out just to show that, again, bearing in mind we're at an outline consent, we've actually got plant species pinned down for the different character areas. and it gives you the plant stock size and tells you the kind of spacing they'd be planted at, etc. So all of these steps have been taken already, which again just knocks out that wriggle room for developers at a later stage. That kind of sort of negotiation that we often get where they might want to put a cheaper or a lower quality plant in, but we've gone through that scrutiny already here. There are 2 play spaces that I mentioned on the site. So again, it's quite easy to forget play areas in terms of quality or push them to a planning condition to be dealt with at a later stage. But we didn't want to do that here because officer-wise, we feel that we've got a really high level of quality across the site, and these are an integral part of the site and the community that will be living here. So essentially what we've got is a series of design principles and guidance for both play areas. Again, so we would know what we were getting, and it gives us a huge head start on the normal negotiations that we would have. Again, for each play area, you then have a plan with a series of bullet points that you would need to hit. So I'm just going to move on to the section 106 matters now. What I did want to emphasize really was that the design code and the drawings came from a very lengthy process with the applicant engaging very constructively with officers throughout. We had 2 design workshops and several pre-application meetings. And it was similar to the Straits Mill process where we had specialists from each side, some from the council, such as landscape officers, design consultants, and then we had the equivalent from the developer's side. And that allowed officers to have a huge input and to really push for the highest standards. And it allowed the applicants team to really engage with officers and work constructively to get the level of detail and the level of quality that we've really been able to push for on this site. So I'd just like to take members through section 106 and just add a little bit more detail to some of these heads of terms. The affordable housing, 30%, so what we'd normally expect would be compliant with the draft policy and compliant with what we'd normally expect in this area. That would equate to, if it was 575 dwellings, that would equate to 172 affordable dwellings, 70-30 tenure split, affordable rented over shared ownership, and all the dwellings will be nationally described space standard compliant. And it's worth mentioning that the design code requires that for market dwellings as well. So that'll be every dwelling on this development will be compliant with the national space standards. Public open space. So we have the BDC contribution, which is our own outdoor sports contribution. And as I set out in the report, that would be approximately £556,000, but that's a formula-based contribution. What I wanted to update members on was the projects that we've got for this. So we've got, similar to that we did again on the Straits Mill, because this development obviously could take up to around 8 years, perhaps longer with the current situation. We've picked a selection of projects to allow flexibility because it's difficult to predict what projects might come to fruition over that time period. So main projects would be provision of the contribution towards the provision of the outdoor community sports centre facilities at Panfield Lane, upgrades or improvements to Braintree Bocking John Ray Sports Ground, upgrade or improvement facilities at Braintree Hockey Club or Bocking Sports Club. And when I say or, these are and or, so the money could be divvied up as was seen fit at the time between any or all of these projects. And upgrade and improve facilities at Braintree BMX Club and or at Sporting 77 Sports Field. So they're the 2 sports facilities that are directly opposite the application site. We have the NHS, which as per the report, by their calculation is approximately £217,000 to improve capacity at Church Lane Surgery, or if they consider it appropriate, to put it towards a new NHS healthcare facility in the town centre. The indoor sport contribution, which is Sport England's contribution, be approximately £540,000. And again, we have a series of projects for this. So Panfield Lane, a contribution towards the Panfield Lane indoor community sports facility. So that would be on the next door site. Another alternative would be the new sports hall, if there was one at the Great Notley Country Park. Upgrades to Braintree Sports and Leisure Centre, and upgrades to Braintree or Halstead Swimming Pool, upgrades or alterations. The community facility, again, as I set out in the report, really, one of the things that we wanted to try and push for was to get a sort of either a village hall type building or a community function room for hire, something like that for both new and existing residents in this area. We got fallback position of a contribution of £115,000, but I would emphasise that's a fallback. The idea here would be to try and secure something on site. We have the habitat regulations contribution, which is the standard calculation that comes to approximately £72,000, and that would be to mitigate the development's impact under the habitat regulations. That would be the impact on the protected Essex coastal sites. Education, early years and childcare, approximately £1.2 million, plus the provision on site for the land for a 56-place nursery on the development sites. That would be a county council run facility. Primary school, approximately 2.5 million, and then secondary school, approximately 2.6 million. So they are the county council's formula-based contributions. Requirement for recycling facility, so on-site provision for recycling facilities in terms of a central location, bottle banks, etc. So that would be written into the section 106. Neighbourhood centre, there would be safeguarding in terms of safeguarding its use and requiring a marketing strategy, so that developers would have to demonstrate they had actually actively and properly marketed the neighbourhood centre for the uses for which it was permitted. I'll have an update on the safeguarding, which I'll come to in a moment. And then a requirement for the standard housing phasing and infrastructure strategy. So the second part of the section 106 is the highways and transport matters. So again, I'll just run through these. So we have the Springwood Drive roundabout, a contribution of £395,000 towards the improvement scheme, the County Council improvement scheme. Public transport contribution. So in my report, I said I'd have an update on this. So negotiations have been ongoing with the County Council, and essentially this would pump prime a bus service to the site, dedicated bus service for 5 years. We have a highways officer attending who can explain this if you need more detail, but essentially the starting point of the contribution is just over £1 million. It's £1,050,000. It would be a multi-staged payment. So you'd start with a lump sum, which I think at the moment the County Council, who are still scrutinising this, said would be likely to be in the region of £500,000. And then you'd have a series of annual payments that would be made. Those payments would be minus the revenue that bus company generated. So what this contribution or series of contributions would be doing is funding that bus service and meeting any required deficit. Hopefully the bus service would have a good take up, and then the contributions, annual contributions, could get less and less as the revenue for the service increased until it became a self-sustaining service. We have bus stops, new bus stops within the site and upgrades to existing stops. Then there's the pedestrian cycle link, which I went through on that slide showing the link to Churchill Avenue. And then the last one, this point's a critical one, no more than 50 dwellings to be occupied until the Panfield Lane to Springwood Drive link is in place. So just to be clear on that, that's not the link between this site and the adjacent site. This is the link that would run through the adjacent development itself from their entrance onto Panfield Lane through to Springwood Drive. So if that adjacent developer doesn't put that link in, then this current development would not build any more than 50 dwellings until that link went in. So coming on to my final few slides and some updates. 5-year supply context, I think it's worth just briefly mentioning this. I know members will be aware of it, but just a quick reminder. Currently we're at 4.52 years. That does mean we don't have a 5-year supply. The tilted balance in favour of sustainable development is engaged in the National Planning Policy Framework. And the local plan itself, the emerging draft local plan, is reliant upon strategic sites like this if it's to be found sound. So planning balance and conclusion. This is a site that would have very significant social and economic benefits. It would have 172 affordable and 403 market dwellings. There would be many construction jobs generated over a prolonged period. There would be a new local centre with associated employment and social benefits for proposed residents, but also for existing residents. We would have a high quality, well-considered community development highway contributions and works, as I set out in section 106, and substantial other section 106 contributions as I just went through. Environmentally, officers consider that this is a sustainable location adjacent to the district's main town and with a draft local plan allocation. There'll be new pedestrian and cycle links to the town, new bus stop provision and upgrades, significant public transport contribution to pump prime that bus service I just described, dedicated ecological habitat area with its own management plan, extensive tree planting across the site with a net gain secured by way of condition. And again, it's worth mentioning this is the first time we've actually secured in a condition net gain. Substantial green infrastructure areas with management plans. And the landscape impact is not major for a strategic scheme of this size. The harms, there are harms as there always are. It's contrary to the adopted development plan, so it's a departure from our adopted development plan. It's located in the countryside beyond the development boundary. There is the loss of agricultural land and the loss of greenfield land, although the ecology impact is identified as limited. Tree loss, there is tree loss, particularly on the southern part of the site where you've got the golf course. Although, as I said, there would be an overall net gain secured. There's a landscape impact, it's limited, but there is an impact. There's a loss of the existing commercial facilities on the site, albeit they're not currently in use. Heritage has a slight impact, it's very slight, and as set out in the report, it's on a non-designated heritage asset, which is Oak Cottage, so I don't want to overstate that, but I think it needs to be mentioned. And then there is the highway impact. So overall, officers consider that the benefits of the proposal clearly and substantially outweigh the harm, that the proposal constitutes sustainable development, and it's recommended that planning permission is granted. So I have a series of updates for members. There are no late representations. In terms of other updates, the design code needs to be updated, and it's an updated version. It's a very, very minor change. It relates to the details of boundary treatment with Oak Cottage. The residents of Oak Cottage requested a slight tweak to the proposed boundary treatment that they would have. So that required a page in the design code to be tweaked, and that requires an updated design code, but that would be the only change. There is a need to insert the design code into the approved drawings list. So this was an error on my part where we have got the development framework plan in there, but we do actually need to insert the code into the approved drawings list. It is covered by condition, but it should be in the approved list as well. And then there are a couple of updates to conditions. So the first one is a new condition, and this links back to what I was just discussing about the boundary treatment with Oak Cottage. It's really to do with the timing. So it's a prior to commencement condition, and what it requires is that details of the boundary treatment to Oak Cottage will be submitted and approved to the LPA prior to commencement of development, that the details will accord with those shown on page 78 of the design code, which actually sets out what the proposed shared fence line would look like, and then it will be erected in full prior to commencement of development on site. So this was just to safeguard the residents of Oak Cottage. Some other very brief updates. Amended condition 44, so an amendment to condition 44. The applicants requested the insertion of the word construction. So at the moment it says there shall be no vehicular movements to, from or within the site outside of the following times, and it limits vehicle movement times. That condition is of course aimed at construction vehicles, but it doesn't state that as it's currently worded. So in theory, if phase 1 of the development was built and occupied, people wouldn't be able to drive their cars around. So I think that's a fair point that the applicants requested there. And then two further conditions, which would be new conditions. Normally, with the affordable housing, we've been dealing with requesting certificates for the affordable housing to confirm that it's constructed to the correct spec and standards in terms of accessibility. We've been dealing with that under the section 106, but I'm advised that we should now deal with that by way of condition, because it makes the process for achieving the certificates easier for all parties. So what we'd propose is two new conditions. One would deal with the requirement for certificates to be issued prior to construction of the dwellings, and that would be a design certificate. Basically, an approved building inspector would inspect the drawings and issue a certificate if they adhere to the required accessibility standards. And then post-construction, there'd be a construction certificate. So that would be an approved inspector would actually inspect the houses when they were finished and confirm they've been built to the right size. So all it's doing is stopping affordable units being built that are not to the correct size or accessibility standard. But we're advised that should now be by way of condition. So officers would request delegated authorities to come up with the precise wording of those two conditions, because we would just like BDC Legal to review the final wording to make sure that it's appropriate and robust. Section 106, I have just one update for members, and this is the final part of my presentation. So I mentioned earlier in terms of safeguarding the neighbourhood centre, there were some quite substantial changes to the use classes orders in September. And what that's done is mean that uses such as A1 retail drop into a new class known as Class E. Class E is now very broad and means that you can change shops to quite a range of other uses, which we wouldn't want in a neighbourhood centre, not necessarily because they would be too noisy or unsociable, but because the neighbourhood centre's purpose is to act as a local shopping centre and provide community facilities, and not to change to a use that wouldn't do that. So the proposed update to the 106 would be two safeguarding measures. One would safeguard the proposed retail area and state that currently it's proposed as A1, which is retail. When it first goes into its first use, it will then automatically, according to the new regs, drop into Class E, but we propose a restriction to keep it as retail. So it might sit in Class E, but it could still only be used for retail. And the second one would be the same, but for the community facilities. So they're currently used Class D1, which is community type use. When they were first used, those buildings would drop into Class E, but we would have a restriction to safeguard it to community uses, so that it couldn't be used for other purposes. So that would be the proposed update, which, as I said, is just to safeguard the neighbourhood centre. So that is the end of my presentation. So thank you for bearing with me, members, and thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for dealing with the technical problem so well, and then coming on and giving us such a really detailed and informative presentation. Before I go to members, can I just remind members that we do have an officer from the Essex County Highways here to answer questions, and he is Martin Mason. So if you want to direct a question to him, you are very welcome to do so also. The first person I have that wishes to speak is Councillor Mann. Councillor Mann, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies to members. As this is my ward, I may go on a little. I mean, thanks to Tim for a massive presentation and the amount of detailed work that he's done on this project, and there is much to commend it. But in a development of this size, there's always going to be some points on which I think, need a reassurance. So if I could address a few questions to Martin on highways first. Highways will be very aware of the public disquiet about peak time congestion in the local road network, even the immediate road network. Now, has the local traffic impact of this singular application being considered within the context of other planned possible developments that impact on Bocking North residential roads? CPRE, for example, in their representation, estimates the potential impact in the order of 2,800 extra dwellings in total. I want to be confident that the Highways Authority, particularly in their modelling, have taken this on board. We tend to look at applications singularly, but got 3 strategic growth areas in Bocking North that certainly will be over 2,000, 2,200, 2,300 one speculative site to add to that, and another one possibly coming along. So need to know that that context has been taken into consideration. A lot of the highways modelling, as far as I can tell, is based on data from 2017. Has this been updated, for example, to take account of the disappearance of West Braintree, and, for example, the extra 2,025 dwellings that we're allowing in the Panfield Lane strategic growth location? I don't think that was current in 2017. So that's question 2. Question 3, Highways very properly seeks to address capacity at selected junctions and roundabouts in the area. Is there a timetable for such mitigation work, and is that timetable available to the general public? It's something we get asked about quite a lot. Plans are published, data is gathered, and nothing too much appears to happen. Need to be reassured that this is coming on stream and soon. And a final one on highways. Got another list for Tim in a minute. Number of objectors from Panfield believe that this congestion, or perceived congestion at peak hours in Braintree, will encourage a rat run through the village of Panfield to join the A120 at Dunmow. How likely do you think this is? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I will ask Martin if he would like to respond to those 3 questions, I believe it was. Thank you. 4, sorry, I can't count.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members. Yeah, I made it 4 too, so that's good. The first question from Councillor Mann was around committee development, and as is fairly standard practice for a scheme of this size, we have a transport assessment accompanying the planning application, and we had some pre-app discussion with the applicants and their highway consultants before that TA and the application came in. And we made it very clear, obviously, that Braintree faces a significant amount of growth over the forthcoming years, and agreed which committee developments need to be included in that transport assessment. And if you need a bit of bedtime reading, it's page 41 onwards in the transport assessment. The traffic surveys, as you say, date back to 2017. But again, as is fairly standard practice with the transport assessment, it's not unusual for those to be growthed up using nationally recognised traffic growth factors. So that's an appropriate and acceptable method to growth up traffic surveys to modern day standards. In terms of works and contributions, we normally require the payment of contributions prior to occupation, or it can be, if it's substantial, in a staged manner, a bit like the public transport contribution for this site. And with works, again, we're looking for them to be delivered prior to occupation. Again, though, if it's substantial, there is normally some negotiation around impact and when a large project could be delivered in stages. And then finally, Councillor Mann, I think you mentioned Panfield, obviously a village close to this site to the west. We're not aware of any severe congestion in that part of the world. And as you probably appreciate, our work is purely around highway capacity and safety. And we're not aware of any serious problems out that way in terms of the highway network and would be content that this development wouldn't make that situation any worse. And certainly in terms of MPPF, which is obviously the ultimate test, whether development would create a severe problem on the network, then I would venture that put forward that is unlikely. Hopefully that helps, and of course I'm more than welcome to take any more highway questions.
Right, I'm sure you'll get some more. I noticed you don't appear to have a timetable for when these works will be carried out.
Which works specifically are you referring to, Councillor Mann?
The works on these Springfield roundabout and Rain Road, the works at the junction of Rain Road and Athric Road, because these are two that will come under increased pressure from this development and the others.
At Springwood Drive, we are continuing to gather 106 contributions towards that roundabout, and there is some public funding available as well. And obviously, until we actually receive the money from Panfield Lane and this site, if it gets planning permission, then we're not going to spend too much money on man hours, resources, staff resources, working up a detailed scheme until we have some certainty that that money is going to come forward and we can put it all together and actually and build the project. We do have some options for the roundabout, but as I say, we don't want to spend valuable public money on staff time until we know we've got a bit more certainty around when the money is going to come in and we can actually deliver the project. In terms of Footway and Athric Road, we have been quite strong on this point with this site, on this junction with this site, because obviously we're concerned about capacity at this junction. There's not a lot more you can do to the junction. Red Row homes are, if you want, for a better want of a phrase, are tinkering with the junction, making some minor amendments to the layout to try and squeeze a bit more capacity out of it on the back of their scheme in Rain Road. But essentially, there's not an awful lot more you can do there. So we have said to the applicants that you can have up to 50 units because that's a fairly well recognised number in terms of when you start to feel the impact from a development. So we've said, as we have on the Panfield Lane site, that there should be no more than 50 units until there's a link through to Springwood Drive, because we're very worried about obviously lots of extra traffic trying to get through these signals when probably the applicant can't mitigate the impact of that.
Okay, thanks. Can I move on to Tim, Chair?
Certainly, Councillor Mann.
Thanks very much. Thanks again, Tim. Now, the original proposal for this site in 2015 was for 1,150 homes, went down to 700 in 2017, 600, and now 575. So it's definitely moving in the right direction. But is there further land in the applicant's ownership beyond the boundaries of this particular application, and how might this land come forward? Question number one. Question number two, a matter of detail. The Braintree infrastructure delivery plan that reported, I think, in October 2017, suggested 8 adult pitches, 4 for the Panfield Lane development and 4 for this one. I mean, thanks for your update, but I'm still not quite sure where they're going. I mean, 8 adult pitches, that's a lot. Are you satisfied that you're going to meet this sort of delivery plan target? The same document, question number 3, suggests, this is the infrastructure delivery plan, suggested 2 new, emphasis on new, primary care facilities for North and South Braintree. So why are 106 contributions being channelled to the existing Church Lane surgery. I take the point that there's another possible channel to the sort of the Manor Street hub, but as I understand it, there's no guarantee that there will be a new surgery there. So, you know, I'm very interested in the capacity that will be provided by these monies, and I wonder why we're not attempting perhaps to provide a bigger facility on the Panfield Lane development rather than seeking to expand the facility at Church Lane. I don't know whether that's based on NHS advice or not. I'll be guided by you. One more question, no, two more questions. The infrastructure report suggests a lot of activity in providing infrastructure in the period 22 to 27. Now that's pretty close at hand, and we're still not through reserved matters. So has there been any slippage in the sort of time program for the development? And the last one, which sprung up during your presentation, why isn't there public accessibility to the pond area? That would be great if there were. Is it on you know, health and safety grounds or conservation grounds? Why are the public not going to be allowed in that bit if they're going to be allowed into the flower meadow next door? Sorry, members, to go on. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I decanted those. I think that was 4 or 5 questions, and I will ask Tim if he will respond. Can you respond, please, Tim?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Mann. I've got 5 questions there. So the first one was about the extra land, and do they own any more land, and are they likely to bring it forward? Is there anything in the pipeline, etc.? So they do own more land, and you might have seen on the first slide there was an area outlined in blue. That's where the ecology area is. The rest of that field's outlined in blue. When officers aren't aware of anything there, and I would also add there's a few sort of sensitivities there. Firstly, in terms of coalescence and pushing the developable area beyond. At the moment, it's very well contained. What's proposed? There's the wildflower meadow, and beyond that is a tree line, and then you've got the ecology area. If you were to develop that field, you'd be pushing development way out into the countryside beyond the wildflower meadow area. So you'd have issues in terms of coalescence. You'd also have issues in terms of the green buffer that's proposed in the draft local plan, which specifically protects that area to avoid coalescence. So although we obviously can't prejudge what could happen and planning applications that could come in, I'm fairly comfortable at officer level saying that I don't think that's something that we would be supportive of. I think putting something next to a sensitive ecology area and pushing it out as a sort of isolated parcel like that would at face value not be appropriate. So that was the first question. The second one was about pitches and 8 pitches. In terms of securing money for sports facilities, we can only secure what's compliant with the SIL test. It needs to be proportionate and it needs to be evidence-based. So what we've got are 2 separate contributions: the outdoor contribution, which is the BDC one, and the indoor sports contribution, which is the Sport England contribution. They are maximised, and we haven't negotiated any reduction in those. We've simply applied the evidence-based formula, and then we've applied a wide range of projects to which we could use that money for. So in terms of our officers we're confident that we've secured as much as we possibly can whilst meeting the SIL test, and we're confident we've lined up as many appropriate projects that are taken from the open spaces area action plan and from identified need within the district. So we've done the maximum that we can to secure outdoor sports facilities and indoor sports facilities. The NHS, You asked why to Church Lane and why not a new facility. That is largely down to the NHS. So as they always do, they have their formula that they've calculated what they would require. The addition where we suggest the town centre, subject to the NHS, obviously, because it will be their contribution, it's their statutory duty to provide that service. But we tried really to expand on what they were asking and tried to give them another option, so that if there were another health hub facility, they would have the option to divert that money, some or all of it, to there if they thought that was appropriate. But we can only divert it to projects that they're willing to divert it to. So in terms of the timescale, I think you were referring to timescale for this proposal. I think your question was in terms of slippage for this proposal. So if that was the case, has there been any slippage? Well, I think the thing that I noticed was often we've agreed a reduced time period for reserve matters. So reserve matters would come in a year earlier. And the developer here, or the applicant, have not been able to agree that. And I think that is largely to do with coronavirus, because the pressure, if this is granted, the pressure that would put them under in terms of disposing of the site to an appropriate developer, etc., given the current uncertainty, would be too high. So I have to say I'm not surprised actually that that they weren't keen to agree that. So we've got potentially a year's slippage there. Beyond that, they haven't said anything, and I think it's very, very difficult to make a judgment. So I don't really feel that I could offer much more information on that, other than we have got a slight slippage that I've seen. And then why no public access to the ecology area? So I'm guided by the ecologists on this, and it was to do with preserving that habitat and leaving it undisturbed. If members felt very strongly about that, then certainly officers could investigate that through, there were conditions proposed, ecology management strategies, and we could go back and ask the question, is there a way of getting public access there? I think probably the main point would be, if the public access, it was indeed the case that it was so clear cut that it would damage the habitat and they weren't compatible, then I think that would probably have to be the outcome, really. But we could certainly ask that question, is there a way of getting some sort of pathway in or viewing area or something like that? I think that was all your questions.
Yes, that was all the questions from Councillor Mann. So I will now move on to Councillor Unsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, I think if this is, and thanks Tim for the presentation and the work, I know there's quite a lot of work goes in these design guides, and based on the training that we had the other day, if we're now seeing design guides like this coming out ahead of planning applications, I think that's a very good sign. Design-led planning, I think, is the way to go. A couple of things I noticed on one of the tables you put up there that you had defensible planting in there, and I'm just wondering why the design guide is not including things like secure by design or SEPTED, which is designing out crime at the early stages. And I think as a design guide, crime prevention through environmental design is a big thing now, which is driven by SEPTED, driven by secure by design. And I really think that is something at a design guide stage that should be included in this. The other couple of comments that I've got on it are, we've got a lot of things about foul drainage and water, but we haven't got anything on grey water recovery and the use of grey water in what is fundamentally a water-starved or dry area, and if it's possible to look at that. And energy recovery, which doesn't seem to feature at all at the moment, and especially since we've got charging points and possibly linking the energy to charge points where cars applied. I just wonder if you comment that, but I really would like to see if we can't propose something on the secure by design and crime prevention through environmental design as a design philosophy within this design guide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Tim, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Unsworth. So in terms of the why no secure by design, there's two reasons for that, really. One is that we don't actually have a solid policy basis to require it. The other one is that although secure by design in its own right is an excellent process and does achieve positive outcomes, there can be some quite serious conflict in terms of design and layout. So secure by design, a secure by design architect or the police liaison officer who's dealing with that will look at it purely from what's secure in terms of design, but at the cost of everything else. So if we were to impose you must achieve secure by design, I think the outcome would be a reduction overall quality, because we'd be looking from only through one lens, if you like, just to secure that outcome. I think in terms of how we address that, it's a difficult one. We could use an informative, we could add some text to the code, but I think the officer recommendation would be not to condition it as you must achieve it, because I think it would come at the cost of quality elsewhere. And I'm not really sure that's something that I've yet seen a solution as to how to resolve that. Reuse of grey water, and also you talked about general sustainability. So again, it comes back to a policy basis. We can require, obviously, X, Y, and Z, but we have to have a policy background and policy basis to it. We don't have a specific policy for grey water. And in terms of electric vehicle charging, again, we don't have a specific policy, but we've pushed harder on this site than we have on previous ones. And we have actually got a requirement in there for a minimum of 1 electric vehicle charging point per dwelling. And I think from memory, that's in a condition. If not, it's 106, but I'm sure it's condition. So yeah, we've pushed further on the sustainability measures. I think we're probably at the outer envelope of where policy stops. But I feel that at the moment, we don't have a basis to ask for or require more than that.
Okay, thank you. I think it was RLP 75 which was the grey water and energy recovery one. And if I could just ask, if you look at CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design, rather than secure by design, CPTED is an evolution of it that is not quite as rigid. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we have to accept the local plan position, in that although this is a departure, it is mostly a site allocated in the draft local plan, which is closer to where we should be than some of the sites we've had to look at. I think the indicative layout is quite good. I very much support the work officers have done on the design code, though I would ask yet again that these codes always seem to be written with this same format of tiny writing. I've got a 2-foot screen in front of me and I could barely read that writing. So maybe other members are okay, but why they're always written in such a small font, I don't know. The housing mix, obviously that meets policy. We've got 30% affordable, which is very good. There's some very good features. The community growing area, I was going to ask whether there's any allotments. There's a community growing area, so that's really good. Picking up on Councillor Unsworth's point, I'm assuming we don't have any renewable energy on site, which is a bad point. Now I know what Tim Havers will say, we haven't got a policy position, a national or a local one, to support that at the moment. But it is a fact that the vast majority of housing being built in this district at the moment does not have any on-site energy generation, and that I think is a huge missed opportunity, but I appreciate it's not entirely the fault of the district council. Couple of worries, I think, as Councillor Mann raised, the position with the health provision is a concern, and from my perspective, something I always ask about a community facility, it doesn't appear to be secure. The officer mentioned a fallback position. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that, what that would involve. And then 2 other major areas, ecology. Yes, some of the ecology aspects are very good. I mean, personally, I think it's a good idea that we should have some small areas which are not public access, because I think we need space for wildlife. You know, public access is almost everywhere else, so let's have some small spaces for wildlife which aren't. However, I have to come back to my hobby horse. So major loss of trees, and the excuse this time is that they're not visible. Quote from the officer report, they're not visible. But of course, if we kept them, they would be visible because they'd be within the housing estate. So I don't really understand where that comes from. And although I appreciate a lot of them are on the golf course, and I could see some of the photographs, there's quite a few conifers in there. I think the point I would really like to strongly make is, and this is based on evidence of going round. So in the Witham area, which is the area I know best, if you go around a lot of the development sites which have been improved in the last few years, the trees are literally dying. The landscaping trees that have been put in by developers are dying because of the effects of climate change, heat stress, longer periods of dry weather. If you look at, I'll give examples. If you look at the Lodge Farm estate, have a look at the trees at the entrance to that. A lot of them are in a very poor state. The little developments, the retail developments in Witham, probably 50% of the trees put in by the developers in the last year or so are dead or dying. So whilst the net gain the officer talked about is supported, how do we ensure, because if we just say, well, they've got to be replaced within 5 years, well, the ones they put in as replacements could die. How do we ensure there's an aftercare that's rigorous enough to make sure those trees actually survive and become as good as we hope they would be? And I did read in the officer report about trying to make sure the timing of works isn't such that it's in an inappropriate time of year. Well, I have to say, I don't know how much control we have over that. The Bellway site in Rivenhall, we had a significant amount of mature hedgerow ripped out in June. Pretty much the worst time of year you could possibly do that. I know there was an ecologist who said it was all right, but how do we avoid that happening again? In terms of net gain on ecology, again, very pleased to see that. But how do we measure that? Who's going to go back in 10 years' time and say, yes, there's this amount of ecology now, and there was this amount of ecology before the development started? It doesn't seem to me we have a mechanism for actually ensuring there is net gain. And there certainly needs to be on this side, because I noticed in the report, 10 bat species, that's unusually high. That's actually the majority of bat species in the UK. So this is obviously an important site for ecology. And then coming on to the last major issue I wanted to raise, Madam Chairman, and I totally agree with Councillor Mann on his concerns about that, and that's transport, traffic and access. The default, I'm afraid, of Essex County Council is to assume that by making roundabouts bigger, we can accommodate traffic growth. We are simply at a situation already, although obviously COVID's had a significant effect on traffic patterns and volume, where our town centres in both Braintree and Witham grind pretty much to a halt at peak times, and there's standing traffic for substantial periods of time around peaks. Developments like this and all the others which Councillor Mann referred to around Braintree are simply going to add to that problem unless we do something far more radical in terms of giving people different modes of access. And it's no good just making roundabouts bigger, because that will not solve the problem in the long term. And although it's good to see there's going to be a dedicated bus route, I'd just like to ask officers, but as a final question, the cycle link appears to be quite a short section off-site to go to, I think, a road that the officer named in particular. Was there any consideration for developer contributions from this site going towards the priorities outlined in the Braintree Cycling Action Plan, which is really vital in terms of joining up all the fragmented bits of cycleway we have in towns like Braintree, because obviously we need people. It's really good, the cycle provision on the site. I strongly welcome that. But how do we get people into the town centre from here? I suppose that's what I'm saying. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Abbott, I'll ask Tim to respond first, and then perhaps Martin would like to come back as well. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Okay, so just working through those questions. I think you started with a question on the fallback for the community centre. Why is there a fallback and how would it work, etc. I think the initial position actually was a financial contribution, but what we thought officer-wise also, we would try and push to secure it on the site, because it's easy just to take a financial contribution. It will be harder to make something work on site, but we feel we should try, and if we can do it once, and we can do it again moving forward. The main problem is whether it's a freestanding building that's built by a developer, or whether it's a dedicated room within one of the existing retail or commercial areas, we need someone who's willing to take that on and manage that building or that room. So we might have, for example, particularly with things like the community growing area, might have an active residents group, and they might say that actually they were keen and they would like to take that on, but we might not. And if we don't have anybody to take it on, bearing in mind we haven't got a parish council in the vicinity, then we end up in a scenario where we couldn't just have a building that wasn't managed by anybody. So then the fallback position would be, if we fail in doing that, we would at least secure a financial contribution rather than just lose it. But we would like to have a go at getting it on site, and I think there are probably a number of other developments, maybe even in other districts, where we can look at examples of how that's been achieved. I think it's worth trying, because I think the benefits, if we can achieve it, would be quite substantial, and particularly in terms of bringing existing and new residents together. So it requires some further thought, and we will be in new territory to a degree, but we think it is it's worth trying rather than just taking a contribution. Tree loss. So you mentioned the golf course, which is where the majority of it is, and it's correct. There are a lot of conifers there. The problem with the trees on the golf course is that they've been planted obviously to serve the golf course, and in design terms, if you look at aerial photography of that part of the site, they're all over the place in terms of a layout. So were we to try and design a layout that could retain all of them, it would be, I'd say, virtually impossible to achieve anything decent, because you would be building around trees that are dotted all over the place. So the starting point was looking at the quality of the trees and what grade they were, what category. There's definitely no category A's. I think it's category B's and C's, and some U's as well. So in terms of achieving a quality of development, there is a necessity to remove those, but perhaps not all of them. I did mention in the report, when we get to the really detailed stage, we may well be able to improve on that and to retain some of those. The point about them not being visible was a comment made by the landscape officer, but I haven't, in my own evaluation, I haven't sort of laboured on that too much, because, as you say, okay, at the moment they're not visible, but as you say, they would be if they were in the middle of a development. And then also you have got the footpath as well. So, you know, if you happen to turn that way, then you can see some of those trees. I think the point in general planning terms is more about the quality of them, the issue that they would cause for the quality of the development, and then securing replacement and securing net gain and securing quality trees as well. And things that you mentioned about trees dying, etc. So what we've really tried to focus on, for example, on the major spine road, is getting a 3-metre verge each side. So when you're planting legacy trees in that rhythmic fashion down that main spine road, or those main pair of spine roads, they've got the space to actually survive and to thrive. The 5-year question is a difficult one. We've got a management plan, we've got our standard condition. I don't know what other policy basis we have to push beyond 5 years. I've never seen that done, and Chris may have a comment to add on that, but I'm not aware of any basis for pushing beyond that. So to my knowledge, the best that we can do is ensure the correct species are planted in sufficient space and managed properly, and then we've got the 5-year replacement. But I don't know, I'm not aware of any mechanism to get that lengthened. You also mentioned timing, avoiding inappropriate timing. Again, that is quite a difficult one, because if there's a qualified ecologist on the site saying and following the correct legislation, I assume you're talking about, for example, bird nesting, if you were referring to Rick Stone's Bellway development. If they're following the correct legislation and they're not breaching that, then they're doing what they need to do. So that does make it difficult for us. Having said that, we take those points on board, and I think what we can do officer-wise is monitor these situations more and more closely, and perhaps have a look at some of the triggers for signing off conditions, and see if we can add a bit more scrutiny. But again, it's a difficult one, because providing they adhere to legislation, then they are doing what they need to do. An interesting question about net gain and how do we measure that. And actually, nationally, the government, whilst the NPPF requires net gain, it doesn't actually say what that percentage should be, and it doesn't really give you guidance on how to do it. My understanding is that they are going to release some guidance, and there's going to be some sort of biometric calculation that you can do. I don't know for certain, but I would assume it must have timescales on it, and it must allow for exactly what you've said, someone going back in X amount of years and confirming that what's supposed to happen did happen, because without that, obviously, it is a worthless calculation. But that's something that's in the pipeline. So at the moment, we don't have guidance from central government on that. But we do have detailed conditions here, and we do have the ability to scrutinise management plans. And bearing in mind, it could take, roughly speaking, I think around 8 years for this development to be built. That may well be that metric is released in the next year or so. The last I heard was it was due to be imminent. That was back in January. So it may be that something kicks in that we can then apply. And then Churchill Avenue was the road that I was referring to about the cycle link. So in terms of cycle strategy, the problem with this was we had an ability to secure something, and I think we looked at going southwards down Panfield Lane, but it would have required, and that was the starting point, it would have required the removal of a big section of hedgerow the entire way down there. So we had to work out, if you take that direct link, is the trade-off of that section of hedgerow, and it was really quite substantial, worth it. The other way, it's much shorter. So in terms of cycling, that was our focus. The cycle strategy, we didn't look beyond that, simply because in terms of what's proportionate and necessary, I think this is pretty well maxed out. So in answer to your question, it wasn't the Straits Mill scenario where we could go beyond that. I think we had to focus on one project, and we felt that this particular link was critical. So I think that's probably my answer to that. The highway matters is one for Martin Mason. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'll go to Martin next, and then I think Chris would like to come in. Martin, can you respond, please, to Councillor Abbott?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Tim. I wouldn't need to say much more than what Tim's already said about the cycle link. He's absolutely right in what he said. We worked quite hard with the applicants to find a solution to enable cyclists to get safely from this site into the existing built-up area of Braintree. That was a really important factor for us in terms of this scheme being successful. We're very much aware that it's on the edge of Braintree and it doesn't have a particularly good cycle network there at the moment, and the roads are quite busy, so we really wanted to make sure we got an off-road facility between the site, enabling people to get into the built-up area of Braintree and into the town centre on the relatively quiet, well, much quieter roads on the Churchill Road estate. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Chris, did you wish to come back on one of the points, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members, and thank you for the questions, Councillor Abbott. Just wanted to come back on your concern that you've raised in respect of the landscaping, and specifically the point that I've written down there is really around the aftercare of the new tree and hedgerow specimens being planted, particularly along the Spine Road. Obviously, as Tim has explained, a lot of thought has gone into making sure that the Spine Road, the specifications set out in the design code, is of a standard to ensure that enough space and room is provided for those trees to establish. But I take the point over the aftercare point and the fact of other experience across the district. So what we could potentially do within the wording of condition, and just to assist members, that's condition 5 within your report, which relates to landscaping. That's at the top of page 65 of your agenda papers. What I'd suggest potentially there within the first paragraph is we could bolster the wording there to actually include proposals for how that would be irrigated or maintained. I know that's a matter that's previously been raised by members, and I think most recently by Councillor Parker at another recent meeting. So that would be my suggestion, is potentially we could bolster the wording of that condition. And separately and aside for that, because I appreciate this is a matter that's been raised several times by members now, we will take that back as officers and actually have a look in terms of trying to incorporate that potentially more within sort of standard wording of conditions that we put forward going forward. So we'll take that back as a separate action with our colleagues in Landscape Services, but that would be my suggestion in relation to that condition, that we could bolster the wording of condition 5, should you be agreeable to that. So that was all I wanted to add, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. That's quite helpful, because I know it has been a concern on several applications just recently.
Yes.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm making a series of notes here, and as the evening goes on, they're getting greater and greater. I'll start with a couple of very simple questions covering both the young and not so young. Just questions I'd be interested to know the answers to. Public open space mentioned on page 52 mentions children's play space. Will any equipment be provided? I mean, we have a new play facility here in our village. The children are absolutely loving it. It's all very well having just some green spot, but what about the actual equipment? I mean, is that something for consideration or not? And the second one, again, a very large estate, mainly covering probably the older people. Any consideration being given to defibrillators, etc.? of which we have a number around the villages. And I'll just finish off by making a comment. I'm very concerned about the traffic flows in and around these estates. You know, we're very adjacent to very large developments taking place and for the future. I think the traffic problem is going to be immense. Yes, we can build roundabouts, but as already been mentioned, that doesn't really help traffic coming from all directions. And knowing Panfield village very well, and it's very much adjacent to this estate, it's an ideal cut through to the A120 and onwards to the motorway. Certainly I would use it if I lived there rather than go around Braintree. I mean, Braintree is a no-no in rush hour. If I could perhaps get some answers, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Tim, I'll ask you to respond, although you did mention the play equipment in your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So your two questions there. So with the play space, yes is the answer to equipment. The design code covers it to a degree, and then we would have a section 106 requirement on top of that in terms of the spec, etc. It would either be equipment, or it might be the case, if it was done extremely well, it could be that it was more natural play, but not the case of, you know, chucking a few logs in and saying children can play on that. It would be done properly. But I think the code requires the quality. So it would either be equipment or it could be more natural, but it would be something that children could use, and it would be very well thought out and of a decent quality. And I think that does come back to the advantage of having a design code. So it already sets out the level of quality that we'd be looking for there. The defibs is an interesting one. In general terms, it's not really a planning matter, but moving forward, it is an interesting question, and I think probably officers could take that away and ask whether in future we could investigate whether any section 106 contributions could go towards something like that. It's not something I've encountered before, and we'd have to just check with legal whether it would meet the SIL requirements. But if it did, then it's something which is obviously quite pertinent. So I think there'd be a point we could take away as a learning point, really, and just investigate. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I do think that perhaps the traffic problems have already been answered, Councillor Johnson, and I don't think there's probably much more that can be added at this stage. So I now move on to Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you very much, Tim, for a very good presentation. I think the thing that's exciting for me about this development is the design code, and thank you for taking us through it. It's very clear for anybody, as you said, who picking that up would be able to read it and know exactly what was required any developer would need to do, and it's very visual as well, with lots of drawings and diagrams, and I think it's a really something that is to be applauded, and congratulations really to you and the team and everybody's worked on producing that. I think it's really positive. I'm also very pleased to see that you have got a community building proposed for this site. There was something I sort of rather felt was missing at Straits Mill, but I do acknowledge the issues about management. I hope that it would be a facility that people could use for Pilates classes and yoga and all the other things that people seem to want to. They just need a building from which to provide these classes. So I hope that would provide that. Just a few questions. The top of my list actually was irrigation, which Chris has already addressed. So thank you very much, Chris, for picking that up, because obviously the reason why trees die is because they need watering in the first 3 to 5 years of their life. Is absolutely key. So I'm pleased you've identified that. A couple of other questions. On the ecology area, I'm afraid I don't agree with Councillor Mann. I do think if you're going to set aside an area of land for wildlife, you do not want people and their dogs in particular to go in there and disturb it all. So it is there for the wildlife, but not for people's benefit. And I was just wondering whether there was going to be any sort of physical fence, or I think there's a stream there, but would it be sufficient would there be any physical barrier to prevent people going in there? And Yes, my other question really was about play. We seem to always focus a lot on young children, but never really provide much for teenagers. I think in the past we've talked about muggers and things like that, multi-use games area. Is there any provision, or could any provision be made for bored teenagers? That's all. Thank you very much.
Your councillor, Mrs. Parker. I will go back to Tim on those questions.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Okay, so in terms of the fence to the ecology area, we haven't actually got, I guess, down to that level of detail yet, insofar as we've got a boundary treatment condition that would require details of all boundary treatments across the entire site, and we've got a management plan requirement for the ecology area. So my expectation would be the management plan would set out how public access would be restricted, and then the boundary treatment condition would tie in with that. So it would be a case of whichever developer it was submitting their management plan and then demonstrating to officers' satisfaction, particularly to the county ecologist who we use, that site was not accessible, and then the boundary treatment would go in to adhere to that. But I think it would need to be a fence, although I would obviously seek guidance initially from the ecologist on that matter. But my assumption would be it would be some kind of physical barrier. Otherwise, yes, people could just jump over it. In terms of the multi-use games area, we have a policy requirement for a NEEP and a LEAP. So that's a neighbourhood equipped area of play and a locally equipped area of play, but we don't actually have one for the multi-use games area. So it doesn't really meet the threshold for that. It's an interesting point. I guess the short answer is we can only achieve what we can justify. So there wouldn't be one on there. But it is an interesting point, which again, I think officers could take away, but without the sort of threshold being hit or policy basis, I think we would struggle to justify one. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I now come on to Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would just like to start by echoing what Councillor Arnie Parker said about the quality of this application. On the 4 years that I've been on Planning Committee, to get this level of detail at this stage of an application, this really is up there with regards to the quality of it. A couple of questions, if I may, for Tim. If you could keep in the back of your mind Great Notley as a bit of a baseline, but you mentioned about learning from other developments. A couple of questions. It says that there's a requirement to upgrade existing bus networks and to subsidise bus travel. We had that in Great Notley and it was fantastic until that subsidy ran out and there was less need for a bus service. We now have a single diverted bus route through Great Notley periodically, and just over half of our bus stops now have bus stop out of use signs over them and are no longer used. Is there anything to suggest that, bearing in mind that this is significantly further away than what Great Notley is to Braintree Town Centre, we're quite fortunate in as much as we've got good spine paths and a cycle route to get to the town centre. Is there anything to suggest that this would be a limited contribution that could jeopardise or could be a much needed bus route into the town centre for the demographic of those moving in? And secondly, unfortunately, it's another tree planting question. Again, Great Notley has suffered from how trees have been planted, in as much as it now is affecting the quality of the pathways and some of the cycleways with root spread. Is there anything to condition that we can insist that newer methods of tree planting, i.e. with the use of a substantial root bucket, so as to not exacerbate future problems that once the developer has long gone is left to the local authority to resolve? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. I will ask Tim to come back on those questions. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Okay, so the two questions there. The first one about the Great Notley bus route and the essentially partial failure or failure after the subsidy period. That actually takes you back to the Straits Mill development, and you might recall then in that presentation how we redirected that contribution to the town centre because of the risk of failure. The issue we've got here is that that town centre project is funded, so we can't divert further funding there. So in this case, there is a risk, and there isn't much we can do other than ensure that the funding is sufficient for the 5-year period. And then there are a couple of other points in terms of reassurance. We have the Panfield development adjacent. So the theory is that the bus would also end up, once that development was built out, travelling through there, which would generate quite a substantial chunk of additional revenue. And then it would also end up, it would go through Springwood Drive after that as well. So there are other sources of income there. But in terms of the risk factor, it is definitely correct. It is there, and we just have to hope that it would be viable. The calculations that were being discussed and the figures that I saw did look reasonably positive. So I would hope that it would be viable and remain so. But you're right, there is a risk there. And tree planting, in terms of root spread, I'm just thinking of Great Notley, and I can think of some examples where I've seen that. My thoughts on that were perhaps, if members are minded to, we could add a bit of detail to the landscape condition, just, I suppose, emphasising root protection, and specifically kind of highlighting that point, I suppose, really, and asking for the tree planting spec to pay particular attention to that and just highlight that more than the standard condition might do, if that was agreeable.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Yes, I think it's something that's happened on many estates where the trees have been planted beside the pavement, and now the pavements are being pushed up, and it's causing additional costs in a later date. So I think where they're positioned is quite important. Chris would like to come in on this, on some subject. I'm not quite sure which.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. Sorry, I just wanted to add to that. So absolutely echo the point that Tim just made there. I think, and having remembered Great Notley when it was first actually being built out myself, I think, and obviously dealing with some of the consequences of that now within the wider area of the service in terms of works to trees, I think we do need to learn the lessons there from Great Notley, which is an absolutely fantastic development. Let's have it. Let's be clear on that, but the landscaping there that has gone in, there is definitely successful elements of it, and there are other areas that could have been planned better. And I think it comes back to that point of actually ensuring that the right tree specimen actually goes into the right space, and the sufficient space is left around it to actually allow it to develop properly. So I absolutely echo Tim's suggestion within condition 5 that we can enhance potentially the requirements there to ensure that that takes place. But I did just want to underline that part of the exercise that we have been going through as officers in looking at the design codes, looking at how these larger strategic sites across the district are coming forward, we are trying to learn the lessons from other developments that we know have come forward within the district, taking the successful elements, but also looking at actually what didn't work out particularly well, trying to learn from those as issues, and actually ensure that we can plan successfully for new proposals coming forward. So I think the spine road and the specification that Tim set out for within the design code is particularly strong, and I think providing we actually get the tree specimen correct, which again a lot of thought has already gone into the actual individual tree specimens that would go into that development. Subject to that, we should avoid those sorts of issues, but there's no harm in bolstering condition 5 in terms of the tree pit details to cover those points. And just to again just echo, if I may, just in terms of the point about the wider public transport contribution, obviously having dealt with the Panfield lane proposal, I think what we need to think about is that collectively, cumulatively, what we're talking about between Panfield Lane and Towerlands is this is not just a a single development. This is a new part of Braintree that is going to be created here. This is going to be one new community which will hopefully be linked successfully with the access that goes through the site and the various other pedestrian and cycle routes. So I think we need to always remember that this is, a large expansion of this particular part of Braintree, and there is the potential there that holistically, with all these things coming forward, with the link going into Springwood Drive, the other highway mitigation measures that are going in, that actually the potential for a bus route going through this area actually could be incredibly successful, and I would say actually particularly successful as well for Springwood Drive Industrial Estate as well. There'd be an added benefit potentially for people who work on that estate to have access to public transport facilities going through the middle of that site. So we have sought to try to look, when planning these developments, at the various impacts, how we can actually secure the appropriate mitigation measures and actually try to bring everything together. So there has been quite a lot of thought that's been going into these various aspects, and then also how these developments link together with the various Section 106 obligations and the other obligations that are secured by condition. So hopefully, Madam Chairman, those comments are helpful.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. I now have Councillor Mrs. Spray. Mrs. Spray, Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I think there's an awful lot to like about this development. I know when the Straits Mill application came up, most of us on the committee, I think almost all of us, felt that it was extremely high quality design, one of the best we've seen. And I do believe that thanks to the very hard work on the part of the officers and the willingness shown by the applicant, that they've probably pulled it off again, because I do think this does look very good. It has much to commend it. There are aspects of it, such as car use and potential transport issues, which I think we all share, but they've been well aired, so I won't go on about those this evening. Things I particularly like, just briefly, the wildflower meadow, the pond area. I tend to agree that actually, if the ecology people say that it's better to be kept, without access to the public, then fine. If that's their professional opinion, I'd happily go along with that. I think the cycle provision is excellent. It's something that many councils are really keen on now, and certainly this council is very keen to get people moving on bikes, and they have been over the last few months, whether they've been honing their already good cycling skills or doing it for the first time. It's to be encouraged, and I do think the layout here is excellent. And in terms of some of the detail, it's unusual with an outline application to see such detail on planting and the materials to be used. The screens that Tim showed us on the Barnes area, I like the look of that, and I appreciate the work that has gone in and the fact that officers have pushed quite hard to tie down some of that detail. I have one question, I think, for Martin. I slightly lost the thread on the provision of the bus services between the site and Braintree and the station, Braintree town, that isn't the station, in terms of timescales and the financial provision, I think, although it may be that Chris and Tim have already covered some of that, but I don't know if Martin's got anything helpful he can add. I've got a slight brain fog over that, so I would appreciate, that's my only question, and then I'll, if you could come back to me, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Martin, can you put Councillor Mrs. Spray out of her misery, please?
I'll certainly try to. Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Spray, the idea is that we are looking to secure a financial contribution to support a new bus service to serve this part of Braintree, as Chris has mentioned, what will be a substantial extension to the existing urban area. And the figure at the moment is just over £1 million for up to 5 years support. But what we're going to be doing is writing into the 106, if you're minded to grant, that on each annual anniversary of those 5 years, we look at what revenue the bus service has generated and deduct that from the contribution. So we want the service to be successful. We want it to have lots of bottoms on seats and lots of revenue. So we don't want to just spend that money on an empty bus running around the estate. If you like, the emphasis is on the developer to work on their travel planning, work with the residents to get them on that bus service and paying their fares, because obviously that will reduce the amount of money they owe us each annual anniversary of those 5 years. Hopefully that helps.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sure it does. Yes. You wanted to come back, Councillor?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Thank you, Martin. That's just sort of cleared that up for me. That's fine. Chairman, I would like to move officer's recommendation for approval, please.
Thank you very much.
Second that, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, that's Councillor Ritchie, is it, seconding it? Yes. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Before I go to the vote, Councillor Bowers wishes to speak. Councillor Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to say that while I do agree with a number of the comments tonight, I would just like to pay tribute to Tim for what was an excellent presentation and all the hard work that has gone into what has come before us tonight. Now, I know he's been working on this for a long time, but I just wanted to pay the tribute in regards to what has gone into it for the better of our district and what has come before us. And I know it has been mentioned quite a number of times tonight, but I just wanted to say that. Can I just ask one question though, in regards to the part of the section 106, it mentions for the NHS payment that would have to be made before commencement of any development. Can I just check what does that look like about when that would be handed over? I presume that's before the commencement of any phase at all, but can I just have a little bit of detail in regards when that would liable to be handed over? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Tim, can you answer that question? Or
thank you, Councillor Bowers. Yes, so prior to the commencement of development, so that would literally be the first portion of development. So it might be, for example, the site access is going in, it could be a section of spine road going in, it would be the earliest portion of site work that actually constituted development. I suppose, just thinking out loud, demolition probably, no, it might not, but we would get the earliest possible trigger, but it would be yeah, a very, very early stage of the development. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have no one else registering to speak, and has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray, and it has been seconded by Councillor Ritchie. I have been making notes on all the changes to the various conditions, and I probably have missed some. Condition 5 is on the tree planting. We want to add irrigation and a planting scheme so that they don't die, or we hope they don't die. On the 106 update, I've got the neighbourhood centre is going to be restricted to a retail area, and the community use will be restricted to that. Tim wanted to insert design code in one stage, and there's going to be a new condition regarding the boundary fence for Oak Cottage. Going to amend condition 44 and add 2 conditions, re-affordable housing and the certificates. Have I covered all the conditions? I'm not quite sure. I've tried my best. Yes, I have, I gather. Mrs. Spray, Councillor Mrs. Spray, are you content with those conditions and alterations?
Yes, I am.
And are you, Councillor Ritchie?
Yes, I am, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I'm now going to put this application to the vote. Councillor Abbott.
4.
Councillor Bowers.
4.
Councillor Cunningham.
4.
Councillor Horner.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Mann.
4.
Councillor Monday.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
4.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
Councillor Unsworth.
4.
And Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you, members. Members, that application has been granted unanimously, and I would like to add my thanks to Martin from Essex County Highways for attending. It is really helpful on an application such as this, when we have highway issues, to have the questions answered on the night. It does help us very much, and I would also like to thank Tim for the hard work he's put in. When I was asked if we would have I agreed with Chris that this would be a one-off item for just for an additional meeting. I'm glad I did, because it's now 9:15. If we had other applications, we'd be here very much later. So I thank you for your patience, and I thank all those watching on YouTube, and I'll say good night to everyone. Thank you to officers and everyone involved in tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I ask the webcasters to terminate the broadcast, I would urge members to complete the short web-based survey, meeting feedback survey that will be emailed to you shortly. This is very important to us to help us improve our meetings. I would also like to remind you that the Council will retain performance data relating to your connection to the meeting in the event of a legal challenge to this new way of holding meetings. Thank you very much for bearing with us and attending this meeting. Good night. Please can the webcaster confirm that the